My wife booked us seats 14A and 14B for Mother's Day. She didn't know I could see her phone from 14B, 30,000 feet in the air, somewhere between Denver and a city she said she'd never been to before. I watched the woman I had loved for 11 years light up her screen and smile at a message that wasn't from me, wasn't from her mother, and wasn't from anyone I recognized. I want you to understand something before this story goes any further. I am not a jealous man. I am not the kind of husband who checks phones or counts hours or asks questions he doesn't want answered. I built a life on trust, brick by brick, for over a decade. And in the time it took her to type 4 words back to that stranger, every single brick came down. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I sat there in my window seat with my hands folded in my lap, like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew was coming. And I let her keep typing. Somewhere behind us, a flight attendant asked if anyone wanted coffee. Somewhere below us, our 2 children were with her mother, waiting for us to land so we could celebrate the one day of the year built entirely around the idea that this woman was someone worth honoring. And here I was, watching her prove to me, one message at a time, exactly how much of a lie the last few years had been. By the end of this flight, her entire life would collapse. Her marriage, her reputation, her relationship with the family that adored her, all of it would come undone before we even reached baggage claim. And I hadn't said a single word yet. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it matters. This isn't a story about a man who screamed in an airport or threw a ring across a terminal. This is a story about a man who went quiet, who smiled when she looked over at him, who reached across the armrest and held her hand while she was still typing to another man, and who spent the next 3 hours doing something far more devastating than yelling ever could have been. 2 hours into the flight, she excused herself to the bathroom, phone in hand, the way she always did when she thought no one was paying attention. 2 hours and 40 minutes in, she came back smiling, kissed me on the cheek, and told me she couldn't wait to see her mother. I smiled back. I told her I couldn't wait either. What she didn't know was that I had already started building something in my mind that would take weeks to finish. Something that had nothing to do with confrontation and everything to do with consequence. 3 hours into the flight, the pilot announced our descent, and I looked out the window at the clouds breaking apart beneath us, and I made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is David Coleman, and for 11 years I believed I had built the kind of marriage other people envied. Melissa and I met in our late 20s, back when neither of us had anything figured out, and somehow we figured it out together. We bought a house we couldn't quite afford. We had 2 kids we adored more than anything on this earth. We built a life that, from the outside, looked exactly like the kind of story people tell at anniversary dinners. I tell you all of this not to make you feel sorry for me, but so you understand what I was standing to lose the moment I saw that message light up her screen at 30,000 feet. Here is what I need you to ask yourself as this story unfolds, because I asked myself the same questions for weeks afterward, and I still don't have all the answers. Who was the man on the other end of that message, and how long had he been part of our lives without my knowing it? Was this the first time, or had I simply been the last person in the family to find out what everyone else already suspected? And most importantly, what was I capable of once I decided that silence, not confrontation, was going to be my weapon? I want you to hold on to that last question, because by the time this story ends, you may not recognize the man I became. What I can tell you now is that the man behind that message was not a stranger, picked at random from some app or some bar. He was someone who had sat at our dinner table, someone who had held my children, someone who had shaken my hand and looked me in the eye more times than I could count. And when I finally understood exactly who he was, the plan I had already started building in my mind on that plane became something far more calculated than I ever imagined it would need to be. By the time we landed that day, I already knew 3 things for certain, and none of them involved raising my voice. I knew that Melissa had no idea what I had seen. I knew that the truth, once it surfaced, would not just end our marriage, it would tear apart the entire family that had spent years pretending to celebrate us. And I knew that if I wanted this to end on my terms, I could not afford to feel anything for the next several weeks. Not anger, not heartbreak, nothing that would show on my face at dinner tables, at birthday parties, at the very same holidays where the man on the other end of that phone would be sitting across from me, smiling, completely unaware that I already knew everything. I met Melissa at a mutual friend's barbecue in the summer of 2013, back when I was still driving a truck with a cracked windshield and working 2 jobs to keep my head above water. She was finishing up nursing school at the time, tired in the way only someone working 12-hour shifts can understand, and yet she had this laugh that made an entire backyard turn around to see what was so funny. I remember thinking that night that I had never met anyone who made exhaustion look that good on a person. We exchanged numbers before the night ended, and within 6 months, I knew I wanted to marry her. I proposed on a Tuesday, of all days, because I couldn't wait for a weekend to ask. The first few years were exactly what you'd expect from 2 people building something from nothing. We got married in her parents' backyard with folding chairs and a borrowed sound system. We moved into a small rental with a leaking faucet neither of us knew how to fix. Our daughter was born 2 years later, our son 3 years after that, and somewhere in between diapers and double shifts, and me finally starting the contracting business that would eventually support our family, we became the kind of couple people pointed to as proof that hard work and love could actually build something lasting. I believe that completely. I built my entire understanding of who I was around that belief. The cracks, when I look back now, started so small I almost didn't notice them. Melissa began picking up extra shifts at the hospital, which made sense at first, since the extra income helped while my business was still finding its footing. But the extra shifts became a pattern. Nights out with co-workers became more frequent, and always with people I had never met and somehow never got introduced to. She joined a new gym around the same time, and within a few months, small things about her started changing. The way she dressed for grocery runs, the way she kept her phone angled away from me at dinner. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a woman working that hard deserved to feel good about herself. Her mother, Carol, had always insisted on a big family trip every Mother's Day, something she started years earlier when Melissa's father passed away, as a way of keeping the family close during a day that could have easily been painful instead of celebratory. This particular year, Carol wanted all of us together in one place. Flights booked months in advance, hotel rooms reserved, an entire weekend planned around honoring the women in our family. Melissa handled the booking herself, which wasn't unusual, since she always managed our travel. What was unusual was the confirmation email I found 3 weeks before the trip, sitting unopened in an inbox she had forgotten I still had access to from years earlier, for a hotel in a city we were not scheduled to visit. I stared at that email for a long time before I closed the laptop. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask a single question. I told myself there had to be an explanation, a work conference, a mix-up, anything other than what my gut was already telling me. But I saved the confirmation number anyway, screenshotted it, and filed it away in a folder on my phone I labeled with something completely unrelated, something she would never think to open. I went about the next 3 weeks exactly as I always had, packing bags, confirming flights, smiling through phone calls with Carol about seating arrangements for Mother's Day dinner. Underneath all of it, a part of me had already started paying attention, in a way I never had before. The morning of the flight, Melissa was in a better mood than I had seen her in months. She hummed while she packed the kids' bags for her mother's house, double-checked our boarding passes twice, and kissed me on the cheek in the kitchen while the coffee was still brewing. I remember thinking, in that moment, how easy it would have been to let the last 3 weeks go, to convince myself that the hotel confirmation had a reasonable explanation I simply hadn't asked about yet. Some part of me wanted that easy version of the morning to be true, but another part of me, the part that had started paying closer attention, noticed she checked her phone 4 times before we even left for the airport. We dropped the kids off with Carol before heading to the terminal, since the flight was for the 2 of us alone, a weekend getaway Carol had insisted on so Melissa could have a proper Mother's Day without 2 kids climbing over her the entire time. Boarding was uneventful. Small talk about the flight, about her mother's cooking, about whether we'd have time to visit the boardwalk before dinner on Saturday. I settled into seat 14B, she took 14A beside me, and for the first hour, Everything felt almost embarrassingly normal. She read a magazine. I answered a few work emails. The plane leveled off somewhere above the clouds, and the seatbelt sign clicked off with its familiar chime. Around the 90-minute mark, Melissa fell asleep, the way she always did on flights, head tilted toward the window, magazine sliding off her lap onto the tray table. Her phone sat face up beside it, screen dark, until a notification lit it up bright enough to catch my eye from the seat beside her. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because I've asked myself many times since whether I should have looked away. I didn't. The name on the screen wasn't saved as a contact I recognized, just a first name and a single emoji beside it, and the preview of the message underneath it was enough to answer 3 weeks of questions I had been too afraid to ask directly. I sat there for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 90 seconds, watching that screen go dark again, my hands perfectly still in my lap, my face doing absolutely nothing to give away what was happening inside my chest. Melissa stirred slightly beside me, and I turned to look out the window instead, at the clouds stretched out flat and endless below us, at a horizon that looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes earlier, before I knew what I now knew. I remember thinking how strange it was that the plane hadn't shifted at all, that the world outside that window had no idea what had just happened 6 inches away from me. When she woke up nearly an hour later, she smiled at me the same way she always did, reached over and laced her fingers through mine, like nothing in the world had changed. I laced mine back. I asked her if she'd slept well. She said she had, and asked if I was excited to see her mother. I told her I couldn't wait. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that somewhere between her falling asleep and waking up, I had stopped being a husband quietly hoping he was wrong, and had become a man, building a very different kind of plan, one message at a time, one calculation at a time, all before the plane had even started its descent. We landed a little after 2 in the afternoon, and Carol was waiting for us at baggage claim, with the kind of enthusiasm only a grandmother planning a family celebration could manage. Dinner that night was at her house. The whole extended family gathered around a table Carol had been setting since morning, place cards written in her careful handwriting, a bouquet of flowers in the center for every mother seated at that table. I remember sitting across from Melissa, watching her laugh at something her cousin said, watching her accept compliments about the necklace I had bought her for the occasion, and feeling something inside me go completely still. I smiled through the entire dinner. I asked for seconds. Nobody at that table had any idea what I had seen 6 hours earlier at 30,000 feet. The days that followed required a kind of discipline I didn't know I had in me. I went to work. I coached my son's baseball practice. I helped Melissa plan a birthday party for her niece the following weekend, and through all of it, I said absolutely nothing about what I knew. Instead, I started paying attention to details I had spent years overlooking. I noticed which co-worker's name came up most often when she talked about her shifts. I noticed the gym schedule that never quite matched the hours she said she was there. Quietly, methodically, over the course of nearly 3 weeks, I began pulling together everything I needed, not to confront her, but to understand exactly how deep this went and exactly who else was involved. I called an old college friend, someone I trusted completely, who had gone through a difficult divorce of his own a few years earlier. He gave me the name of a family law attorney, a woman named Patricia Reyes, who specialized in exactly the kind of situation I was quietly building toward. Our first meeting lasted almost 2 hours. I laid out everything I had, the hotel confirmation, the message I had seen on the plane, the pattern of late shifts and unexplained gym visits, and she walked me through what documentation I would need if this ever became a legal matter. She was direct with me in a way I appreciated. She told me that whatever I decided to do next, I needed to protect myself financially before I said a single word to Melissa. Over the following weeks, I quietly separated our joint accounts into individual ones, moved a portion of our savings into an account Melissa didn't know existed, and began documenting every strange absence, every late night, every inconsistency I could find, saving screenshots and receipts in a folder Patricia had instructed me to keep. None of this showed on my face. I still made her coffee every morning. I still asked about her day. I still held her hand at dinner tables, surrounded by a family that adored her, A family that had no idea their beloved daughter, sister, and niece was living a completely different life than the one she showed them. The closest I came to breaking my own plan happened at her niece's birthday party, 3 weeks after the flight, standing near the dessert table with my phone in my pocket, every piece of evidence I had gathered sitting in that folder, Melissa laughing across the yard, with the same co-worker whose name I now recognized from 3 separate late shift schedules that didn't add up. I stood up straighter, pulled my phone halfway out of my pocket, ready to say something, ready to end the charade right there in front of everyone. And then I stopped myself, put the phone away, and walked over to congratulate her niece on turning 7 instead. It wasn't time yet. Not even close. I chose a Tuesday evening for the conversation, the same day of the week I had proposed to her 11 years earlier, though I didn't plan that detail on purpose. The kids were at a sleepover. The house was quiet, in a way it rarely was anymore. I sat Melissa down at our kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten thousands of dinners together, and I laid out everything in front of her without raising my voice once. The hotel confirmation, the screenshot from the plane, the gym schedule that never matched, the late shifts that lined up perfectly with a name I now knew far better than I wanted to. I watched her face change from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like relief, as if part of her had been waiting years to finally be caught. Her first instinct was denial, the kind that comes automatically before someone has time to think through what they're saying. She told me I was misunderstanding a co-worker friendship. She told me the hotel booking was a mistake on the app. But I had spent 3 weeks building something too solid for denial to hold up against. And within minutes, the explanations stopped coming altogether. She put her face in her hands and stayed silent for what felt like a very long time. When she finally looked up at me, she didn't apologize first. She asked me how long I had known, and something about that question, the fact that her first concern was the timeline of my knowledge rather than what she had done, told me everything I needed to understand about where her priorities had actually been for the last several months. The name on that phone, the one I had been carrying around in a folder on my own device for 3 weeks, belonged to Ryan Bennett, a doctor Melissa had worked alongside for the past 2 years, and someone who had been to our home more times than I could count. Ryan had come to our son's birthday party the year before. Ryan had helped me move furniture into our garage. Ryan had sat across from me at family dinners, laughing at my jokes, asking about my business, while apparently building an entirely separate relationship with my wife behind all of it. When Melissa finally said his name out loud, confirming what I already knew, I felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with heartbreak anymore. It had everything to do with how thoroughly I had been fooled by someone I had genuinely considered a friend. Melissa tried, in the days that followed, to control how this information reached her family. She called her mother first, framing it as a rough patch, something we were working through, careful not to use words like affair or betrayal in front of Carol. She asked me to give her time before I said anything to anyone, time she claimed we needed to figure things out privately. I agreed to her face, because Patricia had already advised me that patience now would matter far more than satisfaction later. But the evidence I had gathered didn't need me to say a single word out loud. It simply needed the right moment to surface on its own. What Melissa didn't know, what I hadn't told her during our conversation at the kitchen table, was that the hotel confirmation from 3 weeks before the flight wasn't an isolated incident. Buried in the folder Patricia had helped me organize were 4 additional confirmations stretching back over the past year, hotels in 3 different cities, dates that lined up with conferences Melissa claimed to attend for work. This hadn't been a single mistake made under 30,000 feet of pressure and poor judgment. This had been a pattern, carefully maintained, for longer than I had allowed myself to imagine. And once I understood that, the plan I had been building suddenly needed to become something much bigger than I had originally intended. I thought, once Melissa's family found out the truth, that the story would move quickly towards some version of justice, that the calculated patience I had shown for weeks would finally pay off exactly the way I had imagined it. What I hadn't prepared for was how differently people react when the truth becomes public. Carol called me 2 days after Melissa told her everything, not to comfort me, but to ask why I had waited 3 weeks to say anything. She wanted to know why I hadn't confronted her daughter the moment I saw that message on the plane. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, realizing that somehow, in the span of one phone call, my patience had been reframed as something closer to manipulation than restraint. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I expected, largely because the evidence I had gathered left very little room for dispute. But Melissa's attorney took a different approach than I had anticipated, focusing less on denying the affair and more on the 3 weeks I had spent silently documenting her life before saying a single word. In mediation, he described my behavior as calculated, methodical, even predatory, suggesting that a husband who truly loved his wife would have confronted her immediately, rather than building a case against her like she was a stranger under investigation. I sat across that table listening to my own restraint, the very thing I had been proudest of, used as evidence that I had approached my own marriage the way I might approach a business dispute. The custody arrangement that came out of mediation wasn't what either Patricia or I had expected going in. The judge, weighing everything presented, including testimony about the emotional toll those 3 weeks of silence had taken once Melissa learned the full timeline, ordered a custody split closer to even than the arrangement I believed I deserved after everything I had uncovered. I remember leaving that courthouse feeling something I hadn't expected to feel at all. Not victory, not relief, something closer to the realization that protecting myself financially and emotionally had come with a cost I hadn't fully calculated. One measured in weekday dinners and school mornings, I would now only have every other week instead of every single day. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I sat in my new apartment on a Wednesday night that wasn't my night with the kids, and I called my daughter just to hear about her day. She told me about a spelling test, about a fight with a friend at recess, about missing her old room. I sat there afterward for a long time, thinking about that flight, about the version of myself who believed that outsmarting the situation would somehow protect everyone involved, including the 2 people who mattered more to me than proving a point ever could. I had won, in the ways that could be measured on paper. But sitting alone in that apartment, I understood for the first time exactly what that win had actually cost me. A year passed the way years do after something like this, slower in the moments and faster in hindsight than I ever expected it to be. I moved into a house not far from the kids' school, close enough that I could still make it to every soccer game and every school play without missing a single one on the weeks they weren't with me. I built a routine that didn't depend on anyone else, something I hadn't realized I was capable of after 11 years of building every routine around a partnership I thought would last. It wasn't the life I had planned on that flight home from Mother's Day, but it was mine, fully and honestly, in a way the previous few years hadn't been. Melissa's relationship with Ryan didn't survive the year, though I only learned that secondhand, through our daughter mentioning offhand that her mum seemed sad again. I felt less satisfaction in that news than I expected to feel. I had spent so long imagining a version of justice that would make me feel whole again, and when a piece of it finally arrived, all I felt was tired. Carol and I still speak occasionally, mostly around the kids' birthdays, though something in our relationship never fully recovered from that phone call 2 days after the truth came out. I don't think it ever will, and I've made my peace with that particular loss. What this story taught me, more than anything else, is that the version of justice we imagine in our angriest moments rarely looks the same once we actually hold it in our hands. I spent 3 weeks building a case, protecting myself, documenting every detail, convinced that patience and precision would deliver something clean and satisfying. Instead, it delivered a divorce, a custody split I hadn't wanted, and a relationship with my former mother-in-law that will likely never be repaired. I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret the truth coming out. But I've stopped believing that any version of this story could have ended with everyone walking away unscathed, including me. I still think about that flight sometimes, about the version of myself sitting in seat 14B, watching a message light up a screen 6 inches away, believing that the calm, calculated response I chose in that moment was the smartest possible move available to me. Maybe it was. Maybe there wasn't a version of this story where I came out on the other side without losing something significant along the way. I'll leave you with the same question I've asked myself more times than I can count over the past year. If you had been sitting in that seat, watching that screen light up at 30,000 feet, Would you have said something right there in the moment? Or would you have done exactly what I did and stayed quiet until you knew everything? If you made it this far, I want to thank you for sitting through this story with me, because it wasn't an easy one to tell, and it isn't an easy one to relive every time I put it into words. Stories like this one exist because real people, in real families, go through moments that change the entire direction of their lives in the span of a single flight, a single message, a single decision made in silence at 30,000 feet. I hope David's story gave you something to think about, whether it's the value of patience, the cost of certain kinds of justice, or simply the question of what you would have done differently in his position. Let us know in the comments where you're watching this from tonight. We love seeing how far these stories travel and hearing from all of you, whether you're watching from a small town or a big city, whether it's morning where you are or the middle of the night. If this story kept you watching until the very end, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we have many more stories just like this one coming your way. Real accounts of betrayal, patience, and the moments that quietly change everything, all told exactly the way you heard this one today.